Chapter 1241. The southern region was now a troublesome place, so Chu Xiu did not plan to stay for long. However, before he left, Chu Xiu specifically asked Wang Yizhi if he was willing to return to the eastern region with him. Wang Yizhi didn't even think about it and said, "My life was saved by Darren, and Darren also helped me take revenge. From now on, this subordinate is willing to follow Darren's orders." Shang Tianliang, who was at the side, sent a voice transmission. "I rarely see you personally recruiting people. What's so special about this kid?" "This kid is a talent." Shang Tianliang shook his head and said, "Apart from being a little stubborn, I don't see any talent in him." Chu Xiu smiled meaningfully and said, "City Lord Shang, don't put yourself in his shoes. A person who didn't collapse after being exterminated by a top-notch sect, and even cultivated to the true fire spirit refining realm, and even killed the grandson of one of their elders. This kind of ability is already considered a talent." Chu Xiu did not take the initiative to recruit too many people in the Daluotian. Even now in Kangwu County, most of the people were not Chu Xiu's trusted subordinates. They could only be considered cultivators from the Imperial Sky Pavilion. It was not that Chu Xiu looked down on them. It was because he did not trust them. Chu Xiu wanted subordinates. Strength was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that they were obedient. Those people used to be from the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Chu Xiu believed that he did not have enough charisma to make them forget about the Imperial Sky Pavilion and be loyal to him. When Chu Xiu returned to the eastern region, the entire southern region was in an uproar because of this matter. In recent years, or rather in the past few hundred years, no top sect in the pugilistic world with more than 10,000 years of history had been annihilated. The Bliss Demon Palace was the first, and they had died in an extremely sullen manner. Apart from Yan Beifeng and the other upper echelons, the rest had died in the hands of a bunch of small, insignificant sections. In the southern domain, there were many of these small sections. Normally, no one would care about them. But today, they suddenly realized that even ants could bite an elephant to death. Although they didn't have enough high-end combat power, when they joined forces, they were still very terrifying. At the same time, this matter also made them remember a name, the Eastern Domain, Chu Xiu. In the southern region's Jianzhou County, the headquarters of all the sword sects was located on a straight mountain peak. It was extremely precipitous, and its name was Sky-Reaching Sword Peak. At this moment, on the peak of the sky-piercing Sword Peak, Mu Baishuang sat cross-legged on the ground and looked at the old man in front of him. He said in a low voice, "Sect Master, a few days ago, the Bliss Demon Palace was destroyed." It was the Sky Demon Palace that joined hands with the East region's Chu Xiu. The old man in front of Mu Baishuang looked very ordinary. His gray hair was messy and he didn't have time to take care of it. He was wearing an ordinary gray sackcloth, which made him look even more ordinary. As a swordsman, he didn't even have a sword in his hand. This old man was the sect master of all the sword sects and the leader of the three great sword venerables. He was known as the #1 swordsman in the Daluotian world, Sword Venerable Luoshan. He didn't have a title. Sword Venerable was Sword Venerable, the venerable of the way of the sword. He was the #1 swordsman in the Daluotian world. Many people weren't used to the way the sword sects spoke. Their words were too simple, so simple that it made people's hair stand on end. Chu Xiu had joined hands with the Sky Demon Palace to destroy the Bliss Demon Palace. This was a huge matter. If any other sect had reported it to their superiors, they would probably have filled several pages with all the details. But when it came to Mu Baishuang, he summarized it in one sentence. The time, place, and people were all complete. However, Luoshan's answer was even simpler. He only said one word. "Oh." Mu Baishuang didn't feel that anything was wrong. He continued to use his emotionless voice to ask, "Then do we carry out the plan we came up with against the East region?" Luoshan shook his head and said, "No. The people's hearts are scattered. What's the point of fighting? Besides, we don't have time to fight. This time, the Exalted Divine Palace might start the selection ahead of time." "Oh. Why?" "Because we can't suppress the demonic ghosts for much longer." Luoshan looked to the north and said faintly, "A few days ago, the 3 pristine palaces Dao Master sent me a message. Some demonic ghosts have already escaped the boundaries of the central plains. However, they were detected by the formation. The three pristine palace acted in time and killed them. That person appeared 500 years ago and reached an agreement with many of our Daluotian sections. He voluntarily entered the central plains to suppress the demonic ghosts. We thought that everything was fine. But in reality, no matter how strong he was only one person. There were too many demonic ghosts. That was the debt of our ancestors. Naturally, we have to pay for it ourselves. If we start the selection of the exalted divine palace and let a batch of people in, we can still hold on for a few more decades. Mu Baishuang said coldly, "It's just drinking poison to quench thirst. Aren't those who died in the central plains afraid of becoming demonic ghosts? The simplest way to eliminate this problem is to completely destroy the exalted divine palace and cut off the connection with the ancestral lands. The rules of space and time will gradually return to normal. Existences like demonic ghosts that shouldn't be born will naturally gradually dissipate." Luo Shan sighed. "That is the ancestral lands after all. It's our roots. How can it be so easily severed? But it was also us who gave up our last chance to save ourselves and gave up on our roots." Mu Baishuang's words were extremely cold, as if he was speaking from the perspective of a bystander. Even though he was actually a descendant of that group of people, Luo Shan shook his head. "The great calamity hasn't passed yet. We have to leave a way out for ourselves. If you know this, wouldn't the three pristine palaces Dao Master know? Wouldn't the heavenly treasure temples Dao Master know? The roots of the ancestral lands can't be severed, so we can only send batches of people in. Go and make preparations. Tell the disciples of the world's sword sects to prepare to enter the exalted divine palace at any time." Mu Baishuang frowned. Since the demonic ghosts are already at a point where they can't be suppressed any longer, what's the point of letting them go? To throw away their lives? Luo Shan said lightly, "It's precisely because of this that we have to let them enter. Part of it is responsibility, and the other part is opportunity. The stronger the demonic ghosts erupt, the greater the power accumulated in the exalted divine palace. You and I both came from that place, so you should know. My world sword sect has 3 sword saints, and I don't mind adding one more." Mu Baishuang was silent for a moment before nodding and walking down the mountain, leaving Luo Shan alone. He looked towards the north, thinking about something. The affairs of the southern territory were no longer what Chu Xiu wanted to care about at this time. As soon as he returned to the Eastern Territory, people from High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion came to ask Chu Xiu about the blissful demon palace. Except for some details that Chu Xiu didn't want to expose, the Southern Territory already knew. So Chu Xiu told the Imperial Sky Pavilion and High Heaven Sect everything. After listening, the people from High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion all felt like this was unreal. Previously, they were still worried about how they should defend themselves in case the Southern Territory attacked, how they should deal with it, and so on, but in the blink of an eye, Chu Xiu had killed one of the top sects on the other side. This made them not know whether to be shocked or surprised. Of course, in general, this was a good thing. The Southern Territory lost a top sect, and the Eastern Territory also had one less threat. After Chu Xiu returned to the Eastern Territory, he handed Wang Yizhi over to Shang Tianliang and the others to train while he went into retreat. On this trip to the blissful demon palace, Chu Xiu's biggest gain was not Dugu Weiwei's blood essence, but the demon good fortune seed. The inheritance of the blissful demon palace was actually very strong. Although it didn't belong to the orthodox demon path like the heavenly demon palace, it was a different path. It was a pity that the later generations failed to live up to expectations, causing the true core of the blissful demon palace's martial Tao to be lost. Yan Beifeng thought that what he comprehended was the true demon way of creation, but in fact he had also taken the wrong path. Good fortune was a journey from nothing to something, turning the rotten into the magical and turning the impossible into the possible. The acquired demon gods created by Yan Beifeng were forcibly pieced together based on what already existed. Although he was indeed talented, even if he had taken the wrong path, he still managed to achieve the same result. However, the core of the demon good fortune seed was completely different. Therefore, under the true demon good fortune seed, Everything returned to nothingness and was completely restored. After the demon good fortune seed was activated by Chu Xiu's demon way source, Chu Xiu could refine it normally. Of course, this was a cheating method. Normally, only the cultivators of the blissful demon palace who had truly comprehended the demon way of creation could refine the demon good fortune seed. However, according to Tian Hun, the demon way source was the most basic origin power of a world. It was the origin of all demon way powers. Although the demon way of creation was powerful, it was also part of this origin. The ink-like demon seed melted in Chu Xiu's body like liquid and seeped into Chu Xiu's body. In the next moment, the demonic aura around Chu Xiu dissipated and condensed into strange shapes. There were humans and beasts, and in the end, they turned into the most extreme power of heaven and earth. Earth, wind, water, and fire. The 5 elements rotated. However, this demonic aura didn't turn into the normal power of heaven and earth. Instead, it was the power of the underworld, the Yin wind, the yellow springs, and the death fire. In the end, these powers condensed together and formed a terrifying void demon shadow. It looked like a human, but not a human, like a god, but not a god. It seemed to have a body of nothingness, but every time one looked at it, the form it transformed into was different. The power of creation was ever-changing. This was the heavenly demon of creation. Chu Xiu heaved a sigh of relief. The terrifying heavenly demon of creation behind him also dissipated. At this moment, Chu Xiu had a look of excitement on his face. He wanted to walk a martial arts path that was different from Dugu Weiwei's. However, in reality, there were too many inheritances that were related to Dugu Weiwei. Even if he had his own comprehension, he couldn't help but be influenced by Dugu Weiwei. Now the power of the heavenly demon of creation was definitely something that Dugu Weiwei couldn't control. 10,000 years ago, in the lower realm, the martial Tao was flourishing and prosperous. Although it was unknown if there was a supreme expert like Dugu Weiwei, it was clear that Dugu Weiwei was a human and not a god. There were some martial Taoists that even he had not comprehended. Chapter 1242. After refining Dugu Weiwei's blood essence and the demonic seed of creation, even Chu Xiu himself didn't know what level his strength had risen to. Perhaps he could already stand shoulder to shoulder with a first heaven martial immortal? However, if Chu Xiu really wanted to find a first heaven martial immortal to train, he really didn't have the chance. The first level of martial immortal was the first level of familiarizing themselves with their power. Thus, after making a breakthrough to the first level of martial immortal, all martial immortals would continue to train in their sects or in a safe place. After familiarizing themselves with their power, they would naturally step into the second level of martial immortal. So, the weakest martial immortals that appeared in the pugilistic world were at least at the second heaven. Actually, with Chu Xiu's current strength, he could totally try to break through to the martial immortal realm. However, cultivating in seclusion would take too long. 1 year, 2 years, or 10 years. He was confident he could reach the martial immortal realm, but he wasn't confident he could reach this realm in a short period of time. So Chu Xiu was still prepared to wait for an opportunity that would bring him closer to the heavens. Then he would break through in one go, tread on the heavens, and become a martial immortal. After making up his mind, Chu Xiu didn't continue cultivating in seclusion. Instead, he prepared to go out and see if there were any recent news from the eastern and southern regions. However, just as he came out of seclusion, Mei Qinglian came over and said, "The Imperial Sky Pavilion's headquarters sent a letter. Zhong Qiushui wants you to quickly make a trip after you come out. They seem to have urgent matters for you." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. Could it be that the southern region had begun to attack the eastern region? However, if they were to attack, they would start from the southern barbaric land. Why didn't I receive any news? Chu Xiu didn't think too much and headed straight for the Imperial Sky Pavilion's headquarters. In the Imperial Sky Pavilion's headquarters, Zhong Qiushui called Lu Sanjin over, and the three of them sat opposite each other. Zhong Qiushui went straight to the point. "The reason I called you here is very simple. The 3 pristine temples Taoist, the heavenly Luo temples Lord Buddha, the World Sword Sect's Sword Venerable Luoshan, and other top Daoyuotian experts sent a message. The Daoyuotian Divine Palace is preparing to open. Hearing this, Lu Sanjin's face immediately turned solemn. Chu Xiu was also solemn. What does the opening of the exalted divine palace mean? Lu Sanjin looked at Chu Xiu helplessly. You don't know? Why do you look so serious? I almost forgot. Your primeval's successor. Primeval's successors have always been reluctant to participate in the struggle for the exalted divine palace, so it's normal that your master didn't tell you about this. It's a long story. You should know what kind of place the exalted divine palace is, right? Chu Xiu nodded and said, Of course I do. The exalted divine palace is a palace that was left behind after we came to exalted heaven from the ancestral grounds. It's a palace that's used to suppress the passageway. It doesn't belong to any sect, and it's guarded by all the sects in exalted heaven. Zhong Qiushui nodded. That's right. Because the exalted divine palace is used to guard the passage between the two worlds, it's very powerful. When the exalted divine palace was built in the past, almost all the major sects took out their trump cards. In addition, the power of rules between the two worlds is distorted and stagnant, so as long as one can enter the exalted divine palace to cultivate, the benefits are simply unimaginable. Zhong Qiushui said solemnly, for the past 10,000 years, as long as one is at the peak of the heaven and earth elucidation realm, one will definitely become a martial immortal if they enter the exalted divine palace to cultivate. Chu Xiu's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. Zhong Qiushui continued. However, the exalted divine palace's main purpose is to guard the passage between the two worlds, not for Daoyuotian cultivators to cultivate. It'll only open once it's filled with power, so the time isn't fixed. It might open every 70 or 80 years, or it might drag on for 100 years. For some reason, it's opened again less than 50 years after the last time it opened. As long as you pass the test, you and Lu Sanjin will be able to enter the Imperial Sky Pavilion and compete for it. You and Lu Sanjin will definitely have to go to the Imperial Sky Pavilion, so I want to tell you about the rules and the dangers. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. Is the competition for the exalted divine palace very dangerous? Quite so. Zhong Qiushui exhaled deeply. The number of people who can enter the exalted divine palace to cultivate is different each time. This time there are 6 slots, which is quite a lot. But do you know how many people will need to enter and compete? Large and small sects, wandering cultivators, and a few primeval heirs add up to 1,000 people. Even the weakest among them is at least at the true fire spirit refinement realm. After each competition, it's already good enough if half of them survive. For the chance to become a martial immortal, this is no longer a competition. Strictly speaking, it's a slaughter. Zhong Qiushui seemed to recall some unpleasant memories and shook his head. Now I'll tell you the rules. The area around the exalted divine palace is very large, and is located in the center of the Daoyuotian world. That place is called the Central Province, and your competition will take place in the Central Province. When the time comes, someone will give you a medallion, one for each person. There are no restrictions, and anyone can snatch another's medallion. A month later, you'll gather in front of the exalted divine palace, and the 6 who obtain the most medallions will be able to enter the palace to cultivate. Chu Xiu raised an eyebrow. This was a method of breeding poisonous insects. The Daoyuotian people were truly ruthless. Zhong Qiushui continued. Of course, apart from fighting each other for the medallions, there's another way for you to stand out. That is to kill monsters and obtain soul crystals. 1/2 kilogram of soul crystals is equivalent to 1 medallion. At this point, Zhong Qiushui's expression turned solemn. You must remember what I'm telling you now. When fighting in the Central Province, the most dangerous aren't just humans, but also monsters and ghosts. Perhaps none of you have heard of monsters and ghosts. These so-called monsters and ghosts are actually something that shouldn't exist in this world, and only exist in the Central Province. When we came to the Daoyuotian from our ancestral lands, we crossed 2 worlds. Those of us from the major sects naturally had the means to resist the spatial storms while crossing the 2 worlds. However, there were also some people who came from subsidiary sects or were servants of subordinate sections. They also crossed space with them. Their defenses weren't as tight, so many people died along the way. Normally speaking, when a person died, Their soul would disperse unless they had some special secret method to preserve their true spirit and nascent spirit. Only then would they be able to survive. But monsters and ghosts were different. They were like humans but not humans, like monsters but not monsters, like ghosts but not ghosts. When they died in the passage between the two worlds, the time, space, and even the laws of that place were distorted, causing these people who should have been dead to become monsters and ghosts instead. In the beginning, the major sects hadn't paid much attention, but when 90% of the people died in the Exalted Divine Palace competition, they realized just how terrifying monsters and ghosts were. Moreover, the laws of the central province were distorted, so there were bound to be casualties when participating in the competition for the Exalted Divine Palace. Those who died would turn into monsters after a period of time, causing the number of monsters and ghosts to increase. Moreover, as time passed, the monsters would grow stronger and stronger. They had now become a great scourge in the central province, but because of the formation's obstruction, no monsters and ghosts could escape. Every time the Exalted Divine Palace competition takes place, it's actually to reduce the number of monsters and take their soul crystals as one's own achievement. Throughout history, there were some people who were unwilling to kill their companions, so they killed monsters and qualified to enter the Exalted Divine Palace with soul crystals alone. What kind of existence are those monsters? Are they very difficult to deal with? Chu Xiu asked. Zhong Qiushui scratched his head and thought for a moment. It's a little hard to say. They're between nascent spirit and physical body, and they can switch back and forth between the two. Most importantly, they rely on the distorted laws of the central province to live, and can construct all kinds of illusions at any time. To be more precise, they aren't illusions, but existences that are both real and fake. You must find their true bodies in order to kill them. Moreover, the methods of monsters and ghosts can be said to be strange. They can even silently seep into the depths of your heart and kill without a sound. Don't think that those things are easy to deal with. The effort needed to kill a monster ghost is no less difficult than stealing a token from a cultivator of the same level. Therefore, you must remember one thing. Once you enter the territory of the central province, don't believe your eyes or your spiritual perception. Lu Sanjing couldn't help but ask, what else can you believe? Wouldn't that make you blind? Zhong Qiushui pointed at her chest and said, believe in your own heart. What you see in your eyes could be fake. What your spiritual sense could also be an illusion. Only your own heart can determine what is real and what is fake. Lu Sanjing nodded, but he still didn't understand. Of course, it didn't matter whether he understood or not. Lu Sanjing's main purpose in entering was to gain experience, and he was very clear about his own strength. There were only 6 spots in total, and no matter how they rotated, it wouldn't be his turn. Chu Xiu suddenly asked, Pavilion Master, did you also enter in the past? What was your ranking? Zhong Qiushui's expression suddenly turned very ugly. He snorted coldly. The last time I went in, the Exalted Divine Palace opened early. At the time, I had only just entered the ethereal opening realm, so how could I have any ranking? Although Zhong Qiushui didn't say it in detail, Chu Xiu could sense that he must have been beaten up by someone in the Daluo Divine Palace. Otherwise, his expression wouldn't be like that. Zhong Qiushui waved his hand. That's enough, that's not important. Oh, that's right, after entering, aside from the monster ghosts, you can also face martial immortal experts. Lu Sanjing was shocked. They're already martial immortals, and they can still enter? That's not fair. Zhong Qiushui said, in theory it's naturally impossible. However, there are some people who forcibly suppress their cultivation before they have the ability to become martial immortals, not allowing themselves to make a breakthrough. They wait until they enter the territory of the central province before making a breakthrough, also that they can occupy an advantage in terms of cultivation. There are such people every time. If they enter the Daluo Divine Palace as martial immortals to cultivate, their strength will directly cross the first and second layers to the third layer, which can save a lot of time. Chapter 1243. There were loopholes in the rules, let alone a place like the Exalted Divine Palace. The Exalted Divine Palace didn't belong to anyone, but all of the Daluotian people. Many people knew of this loophole, but no one prohibited it. You could take advantage of this loophole and so could he. Any cultivator from a large sect could take advantage of this loophole. The only difference was whether or not there was someone in your sect who could reach the martial immortal realm and suppress it. Zhong Qiushui said in a deep voice, I've told you everything I need to say. After entering the Central Plains, everyone will be teleported randomly. No one can help anyone. Perhaps you'll meet each other by chance. So all you can do is be very, very careful. I'd rather not have the medallion or soul crystals than to make sure nothing goes wrong. Lu Sanjin nodded. Chu Xiu suddenly asked, Pavilion Master, is there a limit to the number of people each faction can send into the Central Plains? Zhong Qiushui frowned. There's no limit, as long as they're at the True Fire Spirit Refinement Realm, or the Heaven and Earth Profound Understanding Realm. You want to bring your subordinates in? That's a good idea, but I advise you to think twice before you act. Your subordinates are quite strong. Even if they don't enter the Exalted Divine Palace to cultivate, they'll still gain something by training in the Central Plains. However, you should know that the death rate is more than half. Losing even one of them isn't worth it. Chu Xiu nodded. If that's the case, then there's no problem. Life and death are decreed by fate, and riches and honor are determined by the heavens. Entering the Central Plains is an opportunity that can only be found after decades or even centuries. I'll tell them about this and let them make their own choice. Zhong Qiushui nodded. Very well. The Central Plains will only open in a month. Bring your men to the Imperial Sky Pavilion's headquarters in 20 days. Then, Zhong Qiushui turned to Lu Sanjin. Kid, I'll open the Heavenly Emperor realm during this time, and use the vital energy within to cleanse your body. It should be enough for you to step into the Heaven and Earth Profound Understanding realm. Lu Sanjin was startled and hurriedly said, But Pavilion Master, only Pavilion Master can. Zhong Qiushui waved his hand and said, All right, there's no need to say any more. I've used up the Heavenly Emperor's Yuan Qi, but it can't increase your cultivation by one more layer. However, it can ensure that you step into the Heaven and Earth Profound Understanding realm. True Fire Spirit Refinement Realm cultivators entering the Central Plains were basically sending themselves to die and trying their luck. No matter what, you're the heir to the Imperial Sky Pavilion. I can't just watch you get killed as soon as you enter, can I? While the Imperial Heaven Pavilion was making preparations, Chu Xiu had returned to Kangwu County as well. He called everyone out from their closed-door cultivation, and called Chunqing Di over as well. He told them about the situation. Looking at the crowd, Chu Xiu said solemnly, Although there are only 6 spots for the opening of the Exalted Divine Palace this time, as long as you can enter the territory of the Central Plains to cultivate, you'll have a chance to increase your cultivation, so this is an opportunity for you. However, according to Zhong Qiushui, the danger involved is also extremely great. The death rate is over half. Gathered inside are all the experts of the Daluotian continent, as well as that indescribably terrifying demonic ghost. Although you're all my people, I don't wish to make decisions for you. So if any of you wish to go, you'll have to follow me to the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Chen Qingdi's eyes lit up, and he said, There's no need to say anything else. I'm definitely going. Shang Tianliang and Wei Shiya looked at each other and said simultaneously, We'll go too. Shang Tianliang and Wei Shiya were both people who had hopes of reaching the martial immortal realm. Furthermore, with their experience, they really wouldn't mind a battle of this level. Lu Jianghe chuckled and said, A chaotic battle? I like it. Lu Fengxian pondered for a moment before saying, I'm not interested in fighting, but that demonic ghost is very interesting. I want to go in and have a look. Furthermore, although the teleportation inside is random, if I'm lucky enough to encounter Brother Chu, I'll be able to help you. Mei Qinglian narrowed her eyes and said, You're saying that the demonic ghost is illusory and very proficient in infiltrating the depths of a cultivator's heart? That's very interesting. I also want to go in and have a look. Everyone present nodded in agreement. In the end, Chu Wuji slumped back onto his chair. He chuckled and said, Since all of you are going, I won't join in the fun. I'll stay here and help you all look after the place. Seeing the crowd's decision, Chu Xiu nodded. It was more or less what he had expected. Apart from Chu Wuji, the others would most likely choose to enter. The reason why Chu Wuji did not choose to enter was not because he was afraid of death. Rather, it was because he did not have a strong obsession with power. He was a person who was easily satisfied. Previously, the hidden demon clan needed Chu Wuji to be the backbone of their strength, so he dared not slack off in the slightest. Now that Chu Xiu had become the leader of the Kunlun devil cult, and had countless experts under his command, he didn't want to be in the limelight. When it came to cultivation, it was better to let nature take its course. Moreover, he was only at the true fire spirit refinement realm. While he was not weak among his peers, he was not at the top, either. He did not have a trump card like Mei Qinglian's karmic fire of the Red Lotus, so it would be dangerous for him to enter. The gains did not make up for the losses. Once everything was settled, Chu Xiu had the crowd prepare to meet at the Imperial Sky Pavilion in 20 days. Chu Xiu's subordinates had actually sent so many people. Autumn Water had never expected this. These people really cared more about power than about their lives. It would be good enough if even half of them could return after the Exalted Divine Palace contest was over. After all, the Imperial Sky Pavilion had only sent 3 people. One of them was Lu Sanjin, and the other was Jiangzong, who was also very obsessed with power. The remaining one was a young executive elder, who had also reached the ethereal illumination realm. These 3 people were enough. If more people entered and the losses were too great, Zhong Qiushui would not be able to accept it given the Imperial Sky Pavilion's current foundation. After the group met up, they headed straight for the center prefecture. At the very center of the Daluotian territory, the entire center prefecture was shrouded in formations. In the beginning, the Daluotian had no concept of the center prefecture, only the Exalted Divine Palace. However, when they discovered the existence of the monster ghosts and realized that the Daluotian did not have the ability to eliminate them completely, they could only set up formations on the periphery to prevent the monster ghosts from leaving and wreak havoc on the Daluotian territory. Over the millennia, the monster ghosts continued to grow and the formations continued to expand, forming a huge territory. This was the center prefecture, and according to Zhong Qiushui, it was as large as 2 counties in the Eastern Territory. When Chu Xiu and the others arrived at the center prefecture, it was already filled with cultivators, most of whom were independent cultivators. The opening of the Exalted Divine Palace was an opportunity for the major sects of the Eastern Territory, but it was even more so for the independent cultivators. They were willing to take the risk even if it was fraught with danger. The people from the High Heaven sect and Cold River City had arrived. There were more than 20 people from the High Heaven sect. In any case, the High Heaven sect had a deep foundation. As long as half of these people could find opportunities in the center prefecture, they would be seeds for martial immortals in the future. Naturally, Xianyuan Wushuang was among them. At this moment, when Xianyuan Wushuang saw Chu Xiu, he looked as if he wanted to swallow him alive. Thanks to what Chu Xiu said before he left last time, Xianyuan Wushuang was severely punished by Qin Baiyuan again. He looked like a jade that was not cut and polished to be useful. Qin Baiyuan even told him that if he did not correct his attitude, the High Heaven sect might have to change its successor. The next successor of High Heaven sect could be mediocre, but they couldn't be so impulsive as to control the decisions of the sect with their own likes and dislikes. Therefore this time, Xianyuan Wushuang learned his lesson. Even if he wanted to swallow Chu Xiu alive, he endured it and did not dare to say a word. Seeing Xianyuan Wushuang like this, Chu Xiu curled his lips in disdain. Who said that Xianyuan Wushuang was born like this? He was spoiled and needed to be taught a lesson. Now that he had been taught a lesson twice, Xianyuan Wushuang became well-behaved. The people from the Cold River City in the Eastern Territory were the least, with only 2. Even Yi Weikong did not come in person. He might be recuperating in the Cold River City. At this time, Chu Xiu was looking at the people from the other territories carefully. Chu Xiu basically recognized all the people from the Southern Territory. Several big sects had sent a lot of people here. Among them, the Sword sect had the most people, and the Great Thousand sect had the least. In the Northern Territory, the Three Pristines Temple alone had more people than the whole Southern Territory. Moreover, There were other Taoist branches such as the mysterious Heaven Territory and the Spiritual Treasure Temple. The warriors stood there, releasing Tao accumulation, which was extremely conspicuous. In the Western Territory there were two camps. One was the Treasure Temple of Heaven, and the other was the Brahmin sect. The aura of the monks from the Treasure Temple of Heaven was very similar to that of the Great Light Temple and Subodhi Monastery in the mortal world. Of course, this was normal, because the two sects in the mortal world were the inheritances left by the Treasure Temple of Heaven. The aura of the people from the Brahmin sect was a little strange, with all kinds of forces mixed together. There were too many inheritances of martial arts in the Brahmin sect. There were 3 palaces and dozens of palaces, which represented dozens of inheritances of martial arts. None of them was weak. In the Brahmin sect, Xianjialua looked at Chu Xiu, who was in the crowd, with a sinister look in his eyes. He was no longer the palace lord of the Solar Divine Palace, but the palace lord of the Vishnu Palace. The previous palace lord had died in a hurry. Even though he had not stepped into the martial immortal realm, he could only take over the position in a hurry. Therefore, Xianjialua had been busy during this period of time. He was busy taking over the affairs of the Vishnu Palace, and he was busy consolidating his power in the Brahmin sect. He had no time to care about what happened to Chu Xiu. Although he did not want to care about Chu Xiu, he did not expect that Chu Xiu's name would come to his ears. He did not know how to describe the fact that Chu Xiu had joined forces with the Heavenly Demon Palace to destroy the Blissful Demon Palace. In his opinion, the Blissful Demon Palace was sent by him to deal with Chu Xiu, so he subconsciously thought that the destruction of the Blissful Demon Palace was related to him. If he did not care about this matter, the entanglement of the karma would affect his state of mind. Therefore, in the fight for the Exalted Divine Palace, whether it was Moriha or the Blissful Demon Palace, he had to settle the karma with Chu Xiu sooner or later. Chapter 1244. The opening of the Exalted Divine Palace was akin to a grand ceremony of martial Tao, one that would affect all of the Daoyuotian people. By the time the major sects and wandering cultivators of the 4 regions had all arrived, the edge of the central province was already in an uproar. Although entering the central region meant that you would have to face endless slaughter, it was impossible for you to escape. However, no one wanted to give up on the opportunities that lay within. Therefore, even though they knew that participating in the Exalted Divine Palace competition would result in an extremely high death rate, many were still unwilling to give up this opportunity. For these cultivators who had cultivated to the true fire spirit refinement realm and the elucidation of heaven and earth realm, the pursuit of power was something they could never give up. Half a day later it was noon. Endless Tao essence rose from the Tao Gate side, forming countless purple clouds in the air that shrouded everyone's heads. The Yin and Yang Qi were hovering in the air, supporting a figure wrapped in Taoist connotation. This was the Tao Master of the 3 Pristine Temple, the foremost figure of the Daoyuotian Tao sect. The Exalted Divine Palace opens for 1 month. Life and death are up to fate, and opportunities ultimately depend on oneself. Please enter, everyone. As the Tao Master's slightly aged voice fell, he gently waved the horsetail whisk in his hand. In an instant, the great formation covering the entire central province blossomed with brilliant light that shot straight into the sky. A glowing portal opened in front of everyone's eyes, and several old Taoists from the 3 Pristine Temples stood there to maintain order, handing out a token to each person who entered. The Exalted Divine Palace was shared by all the sects, but most of the formations outside the central province were built by the 3 Pristine Temple. Therefore, every time the Exalted Divine Palace opened, the Taoists from the 3 Pristine Temple were the ones in charge. Of course, the 3 Pristine Temples' strength also played a role in keeping the experts present in check. Otherwise, the major sects of the 4 regions would have endless grievances with each other. The rogue cultivators would be unruly, and the descendants of Gu Zun would be extremely arrogant. If there were no experts at the level of the 3 Pristine's temple to control them, they would probably fight among themselves before they could even enter the central province and start fighting. Chu Xiu sent a voice transmission to Lu Fengxian and the others in a low voice. After entering the middle province, do not try to show off. There are countless Daoyuotian experts. There are even some who are planning to become martial immortals. If you cannot defeat them, just run away. There is no shame in that. Before the others could say anything, Lu Jianghe said proudly, "Don't worry, when it comes to escaping, I have never been afraid of anyone." As soon as he said that, even Lu Sanjin and the people from the Emperor Sky Pavilion looked at Lu Jianghe in surprise. Was this something to be proud of? Mei Qinglian covered her face and stood behind Chu Xiu. She did not want to stay with this embarrassing guy. Although Lu Jianghe's people were a bit unreliable, Chu Xiu truly believed him. With the miraculous power of the Blood Demon Divine Technique, even if an expert of the first level of martial immortal were to come, they would not be able to kill Lu Jianghe. The others also had their own techniques. Although they were not the strongest, they had no problem staying alive. Shang Tianliang and Wei Shuya were experienced and ruthless. This kind of chaotic situation was perfect for them. Although Mei Qinglian was the weakest, her karmic fire of the Red Lotus could restrain the characteristics of the demonic ghosts to a certain extent. Just by killing the demonic ghosts, they could accumulate many soul crystals. Lu Fengxian was the one that Chu Xiu was least worried about. She had shocking luck. Chu Xiu even guessed that Lu Fengxian might be able to obtain some treasures after entering the central prefecture. After lining up, Chu Xiu was the first to receive a badge. He gestured to the crowd and took the lead to enter the central prefecture. When the white light from the teleportation formation dispersed, Chu Xiu's god domain immediately spread out. A misty domain enveloped the surroundings. This was also a small technique that Zhong Qiushui taught Chu Xiu. Or rather, it was an experience. As the teleportation formation in the central prefecture was random, there was no way to be sure if you would be teleported to the place where the person who entered first was after you were teleported. After entering the central prefecture, there would be a huge battle. There were enemies on all sides. Therefore, to prevent being ambushed as soon as you teleported, you must immediately spread out your domain to defend yourself. However, this was only a small probability. At the very least, Chu Xiu was not so unlucky. Or rather, the others were not so unlucky. Putting away his domain, Chu Xiu looked around. The scene in front of him was somewhat beyond Chu Xiu's expectations. He thought that a place like the central prefecture, where demons and ghosts ran rampant, would be like a region. In the end, who would have thought that what appeared in front of Chu Xiu was actually a stretch of green water and green mountains? The scenery was very pleasant. The heaven-earth essence energy here was abnormally rich. Moreover, it was not ordinary heaven-earth essence energy. It did not contain any different attributes. Instead, it was the purest heaven-earth essence energy that was close to the origin. Taoism, Buddhism, and demonic Tao. Martial artists who cultivated any attribute could refine it without any worries. No wonder there were so many martial artists who flocked to this place despite knowing that it was incomparably dangerous all these years. The existence of the central prefecture broke the rules of this world. Cultivating here was equivalent to cheating. One could ignore the restrictions of the rules of heaven and earth. At the same time, it also meant that there were no bottlenecks. Chu Xiu tried to step into the air and stand at the highest point to see the situation in this region. However, even if he raised his strength to the limit, he could only hover a few dozen feet in the air. He could not take another step. Chu Xiu frowned. This should be because of the spirit array in the central prefecture. In order to prevent the demon ghosts from escaping, the entire central prefecture's spirit array was like a huge cover that covered the entire central prefecture. But now it seemed that this cover was a bit too low. Unable to step into the air, Chu Xiu randomly chose a direction to walk in. The entire central prefecture was as big as 2 counties. Thousands of people were thrown into it. It could be said that the land was vast but the population was sparse. Chu Xiu walked for half an hour and did not see anyone else. However, the scene that appeared in front of him was incomparably strange. In front of Chu Xiu was a small village. It was crisscrossed by paths and smoke curled up from chimneys. It was like a paradise. In front of the small village, there was an old farmer who was hoeing the fields. When he saw Chu Xiu, the old farmer showed a kind smile to Chu Xiu. "Guest, you came here in a hurry. Why don't you rest in the village? The sky is getting dark. It's not safe to travel at night." Chushio looked at the old farmer coldly. This thing was a demon ghost? There was not a single living person in the central prefecture. Now that this village had appeared in front of Chushio, even an idiot would know what it was. However, in his perception, there was nothing wrong with this village. There was nothing wrong with the old farmer in front of him. They were just ordinary people. There was nothing strange about them. It was no wonder that Zhong Qiushui had told him not to trust his eyes or his senses in the central plains. Everything could be fake. Chushio did not choose to attack immediately. Instead, he revealed a smile and said, "All right, then I'll have to trouble you, old sir." For those cultivators at the true fire spirit refinement realm, every step they took in the central province was filled with danger. But for Chushio, his greatest opponents here were always humans, not these demonic ghosts. However, he wanted to understand the depths of these demon ghosts. After all, he had only heard Zhong Qiushui's vague description. He still had a vague impression of these demon ghosts. The old farmer brought Chushio into the village. The entire village was abnormally peaceful. The women and children, and the men who were busy farming, all had warm smiles on their faces when they saw Chushio. The warmth was simply strange. The old farmer brought Chushio into a thatched hut and shouted, "Old woman, there's a guest. Quickly pour a bowl of water." An old woman came over with a bowl of water. She smiled and came in front of Chushio. She handed it to him and said, "Guest, this is the well water that our village dug. It's very sweet. Please try it." Chushio looked into the bowl. It was not water, but a bowl of yellow and turbid liquid. It emitted the stench of corpses. There was even a black and broken finger with a ring on it. There were 2 Sanskrit words written on it. Coincidentally, Chushio recognized them, Shiva. Chushio frowned. What did this mean? Who knew how many years ago someone from the Sanskrit Shiva temple died here? Of course, Chushio would not drink this kind of thing. He just looked at the old woman coldly. Seeing that Chushio did not drink it, the old woman still smiled and said, "Guest, why don't you drink it? Then I'll feed you myself." As she spoke, the old woman actually brought the bowl of corpse water to Chushio's mouth. "You're courting death." A cold glint flashed in Chushio's eyes. With a flash of earth energy, the old woman's head was directly chopped off. But the strange thing was that not a single drop of blood flowed out of the corpse. The head that fell to the ground still had a smile on it. It said, "Guest, what's the meaning of this? Do you think we're dirty?" The smile was still the same, but at this moment the scene was chilling. The old farmer looked at Chushio from the corner of his eyes. "We entertained you well, but you killed us. This is your fault, guest. You're playing tricks." The earth energy around Chushio suddenly erupted, directly crushing the old woman, the old farmer, and the entire thatched cottage into pieces. But in the next moment, all the villagers surrounded Chushio. With strange smiles on their faces, they held bowls of corpse water in their hands and walked toward Chushio. "Guest, have a bowl of water. Have a bowl of water. Have a bowl of water." The demonic voice rang in Chushio's ears and directly seeped into the bottom of his heart, making Chushio's state of mind unknowingly feel extremely irritated. Go to hell. The fluctuations of the god realm instantly erupted to the maximum, crushing everyone into pieces. That feeling was extremely real. Flesh and blood splattered and evaporated, and vitality dissipated. It was as if Chushio had really killed hundreds of innocent and weak villagers in an instant. Everyone, along with the entire village, was completely killed by Chushio. But in the next moment, before Chushio could even react, he was standing in front of the village again. The old farmer smiled kindly at Chushio. "Guest, you've come here in a hurry. Why don't you enter the village to rest? It's getting dark, and it's not safe to travel at night." Chapter 1245. Reincarnation. Another reincarnation. In that instant, even with Chushio's spiritual sense, he did not discover how the old farmer had appeared, or how he had recovered. It was as if time had flowed backward, and he had returned to the beginning. Although he knew that all of this should be fake and should be an illusion, his eyes told him that all of this was real. His spirit sense also told him that all of this was real. So where exactly were they fake? A cold glint flashed across Chushio's eyes. With a wave of his hand, he released another wave of stellar chi to strangle the old farmer. His god realm expanded to cover an area of several hundred feet. In an instant, the entire village had vanished into thin air due to the god realm's attack. This time, Chu Xiu raised his mind power to the maximum and used the heaven's sun gazing at air to its limit. However, the instant the entire village was destroyed, his memories seemed to have been wiped away. In the next moment he was still standing in front of the village. The old farmer had the same, but extremely strange, smile as he looked at Chu Xiu. "Dear guest, you've rushed all the way here. Why don't you rest in the village? The sky is getting dark, and it's not safe to travel at night. If I can't kill you in one go, I'll kill you 10 times, 100 times. A cold glint flashed across Chu Xiu's eyes. He killed everything in front of him again and again. At some point, his eyes had become bloodshot, and his murderous intent grew stronger. In the end, the only thought left in Chu Xiu's mind was kill. He did not even have the thought of searching for the demonic ghost's true body. Just as Chu Xiu was about to lose himself in the murderous intent, he suddenly had an epiphany and snapped out of it. Using his strong willpower, he expelled the murderous intent from his mind. This thing does have some ability. While it seemed as if Chu Xiu was killing the demonic ghost and tearing apart the illusions in reality, he had already lost himself in them without realizing it. In his eyes and perception, these people were no different from ordinary people. Although he knew that these things were not real people, his eyes and perception told him that they were real people. Although Chu Xiu had killed countless people, he dared to say that he had never killed these ordinary people. He was not bloodthirsty. Killing was just a means, not a pleasure. Those who kill for pleasure are not called demons. They are commonly known as perverted homicidal maniacs. But now he was killing these ordinary people again and again in such a real environment. The feeling was so real that it had already seeped into his heart and almost blinded him by the murderous intent. In this place, one's eyes and spirit sense were no longer a question of whether they could be trusted or not. Instead, they were burdens that would lead one astray. This time Chu Xiu was indeed careless. Before coming in, Chu Xiu had always regarded the experts of the other sex as his main targets. He really did not care about these demonic ghosts. He did not expect that he would almost fail miserably in such an easy task. In fact, if he thought about it carefully, since those big sects gave 0.5 kilogram of demonic ghost soul crystal as the same reward as a token, the difficulty of both sides should be about the same. However, Chu Xiu forgot to ask Zhong Qiushui how much a demonic ghost soul crystal weighed. If it was only a few taels, then it was really not worth it to use it to deal with other warriors. At this time, the old farmer was still looking at Chu Xiu with a smile. "Guest, you came here in a hurry. Why don't you rest in the village? The sky is getting dark, and it is not safe to travel at night." This time, Chu Xiu also smiled and said, "Sure, it is not safe at night. Maybe I will have to stay in this village for a night." The smile on the old farmer's face showed a slight pause. Then he brought Chu Xiu into the thatched hut. The old woman was still holding a bowl of corpse water with a severed finger, and brought it to Chu Xiu's mouth. However, this time, Chu Xiu did not do anything. He actually took the bowl and drank the corpse water in one gulp. The fishy and slippery feeling exploded in his mouth. The severed finger was forcibly swallowed by Chu Xiu, but his expression did not change. He smiled and said, "The farmer's well water is really good. Do you have any more? Give me another bowl." The old farmer and the old woman's faces stiffened for a moment, but the next moment, they immediately returned to normal. The old farmer smiled and said, "Guest, you do not need to be so anxious. Our village has not been visited for a long time. It is not easy to meet an outsider. The village chief has already prepared a banquet for you. Then it would be impolite for me to refuse." Chu Xiu smiled as he pushed the door open. In just a short time, the village's streets were already filled with banquets. Countless villagers stood there and looked at Chu Xiu. However, the banquet was extremely terrifying. There were plates of maggots, cockroaches, centipedes, and other poisonous insects. There was also a rotten head that looked at Chu Xiu with empty eyes. The surrounding villagers looked at Chu Xiu with a smile and said, "Guest, please have a taste. These are our village's specialties." You cannot eat them anywhere else. Eat. Then I will have a good taste. Chu Xiu had a smile on his face as he swallowed the plates of horrifying food into his stomach. The feeling of touch and taste were all very real, but it was as if he was really tasting the delicacies. There was even a satisfied smile on his face. The smiles on the faces of the other villagers froze. A little child who looked like he was carved out of jade opened his mouth wide. In a moment of carelessness, his head actually fell to the ground and rolled twice on the ground. The expression on his face was still that of surprise, which was extremely strange. Chu Xiu picked up the head and put it back. He said indifferently, "Little fellow, you are really careless. You have to look after your own head. If you lose face, you will have nowhere to go." Chu Xiu looked around and said, "Is this all you have? Do you have any other methods? Or is it that after so many years, very few cultivators have been able to make it here, so you are not prepared? However, demonic ghosts are really mysterious. Existences like you are not within the rules of heaven and earth. You are not within the cycle of the 5 elements. You can only be born in a place like the Central Plains. If I want to kill you, cultivation is not the most important thing, but the state of mind. I am afraid that you died here because your state of mind was not up to the standard, right? You Sanskrit people are extreme when you are alive. When you encounter demonic ghosts, it is easy for your state of mind to be out of balance. Now that you are dead, you have not made any progress. You are still trash." As soon as Chu Xiu finished speaking, he stretched his hand into his stomach and opened up his stomach and took out a severed finger from within. Chu Xiu clenched his fist, and the severed finger transformed into a black-clothed monk. The monk's body was covered in bite marks, and even his face could not be seen clearly. The monk kept struggling in Chu Xiu's hand. As Chu Xiu's world-extinguishing flame bloomed in his hand, the monk was directly burned to ashes. Only a transparent crystal was left on the spot. As the monk turned to ashes, the surrounding village also disappeared. Just like that. It disappeared right before Chu Xiu's eyes, not leaving any traces behind. Chu Xiu let out a long sigh. This was the true terror of demonic ghosts, or rather the true terror of the Central Plains. If you thought it was real, then it was real. If you thought it was fake, then it wasn't necessarily fake. As long as one was in the Central Plains, after death they would turn into demonic ghosts. This demonic ghost must have been a disciple of the Sanskrit Shiva temple, who had entered the exalted divine palace to train. In the end, it died here and became a demonic ghost. Chu Xiu had paid attention to the people from the Sanskrit sect when they entered the Central Plains. Apart from Xanjialua, a half-step martial immortal, there were several dozen people from the Sanskrit sect. Even the weakest among them was at the peak true fire spirit refinement realm. The cultivators from the Sanskrit sect in the past shouldn't have been any weaker than this demonic ghost. Even so, they still died here. The danger of demonic ghosts surpassed Chu Xiu's imagination. He wondered how Lu Fengxian and the others were faring. Chu Xiu subconsciously picked up the soul crystal and weighed it. The soul crystal weighed roughly 5 catties. This had surpassed Chu Xiu's expectations. Who would have thought that killing demonic ghosts would be more worthwhile than fighting with other martial artists? Actually, Chu Xiu was wrong about this. He could only say that he was unlucky. The weight of the soul crystal determined the strength of the demonic ghost. As for who the demonic ghost was when it was alive, it also determined its strength after becoming a demonic ghost. A soul crystal weighing 5 catties meant that this demonic ghost was one of the stronger ones in the Central Plains. It was one of the rare ones. Yet Chu Xiu had encountered it. Moreover, it wasn't just a martial artist of the Sanskrit sect, but a palace master of the divine palace of Shiva Palace. Its strength wasn't weak, so after it became a demonic ghost, it had such power that it almost caused Chu Xiu to fail miserably. If it had been some other weaker demonic ghost, Chu Xiu would have been able to deal with it easily with his current state of mind. Chu Xiu picked up the soul crystal and narrowed his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while, he suddenly inserted his primordial spirit into the soul crystal and began refining it. Zhong Qiushui had told him that soul crystals could be refined. After refining, it could strengthen one's mental energy and primordial spirit. The reason why the various sects had asked everyone to use soul crystals as tokens was because they were used as a material to strengthen the central plane's formation. Soul crystals originated from demonic ghosts, and could also be used as a formation material to seal demonic ghosts. The central planes was full of opportunities, but of course, the prerequisite was that one had to be alive to take them. Refining this soul crystal now would rapidly strengthen Chuxio's mental energy and primordial spirit, making it even more advantageous when dealing with demonic ghosts. Chuxio wasn't worried about the exalted divine palace's mental energy and primordial spirit. From the very beginning, he had planned to obtain the right to enter the exalted divine palace by plundering the tokens of other cultivators. Of course, he could also take care of his enemies, such as Xianjialua and Xianjialua. The first demonic ghost he had encountered since entering the Central Plains had been a member of the Sanskrit sect. Didn't this mean that the heavens wanted him to end his karma with the Sanskrit sect here? Chapter 1246. Of the several thousand cultivators who entered the Central Plains, only a few would encounter a demonic ghost right away. Although there were many demonic ghosts in the Central Plains, they weren't so numerous that they could be found everywhere. Moreover, those who encountered a demonic ghost might not necessarily run into one as powerful as the one Chuxio had encountered. So in short, Chuxio was the unlucky one. Of course, there were people who were even more unfortunate than Chuxio. In less than a day's time, there were already a few dozen cultivators who had lost their lives in the central province, and more than half of them had died at the hands of the demonic ghosts. At that moment, at the summit of a tall mountain, Xianjialua's body flickered with the golden light of the sun. He had reached the pinnacle, but he didn't stop. As his strength climbed to the pinnacle, the laws of strength and the power of the world were trampled beneath his feet. Treading on the sky, he was a true earth immortal. On his first day in the Central Plains, Xianjialua had already stepped into the martial immortal realm. Zheng Qiushui had previously mentioned to Chuxio that some people might find loopholes in the struggle for the Daoyuo Divine Palace, and suppress their cultivation to wait until they entered the Central Plains before stepping into the martial immortal realm. Xianjialua was such a person. The Brahma sect was also one of the top Daoyuotian sects, and also had peak experts at the ninth heavens of martial immortal realm. They were far more sensitive to such matters than Zheng Qiushui and the others. So Xianjialua had waited a long time for this day. Chuxio. A cold glint flashed in Xianjialua's eyes. He hoped that Chuxio wouldn't die at the hands of the demonic ghost. He still wanted to interrogate Chuxio about Moriha's whereabouts. Of course, Xianjialua's current priority wasn't to find Chuxio, but to find other Brahma sect cultivators. Although the laws of heaven and earth in the Central Plains were distorted, and all communication techniques like formations couldn't be used. But the Daoyuotian secret techniques were endless. And formations weren't the only things that could allow one to communicate with others from afar. He had a secret technique he'd obtained from the barbarian tribe's priests that allowed him to faintly sense those with his blood in their bodies. Although this kind of perception was greatly suppressed in the central continent, he could still roughly sense it. At this time, Chuxio didn't know that he and Xianjialua had a telepathic connection, and were plotting against each other. After about 6 hours, the soul crystal was completely refined by Chuxio. Even the back of his head emitted a dazzling golden light that couldn't be concealed. Chuxio let out a long sigh as a look of amazement flashed across his eyes. 2.5 kilograms of soul crystals had increased his spiritual power by 1/10. This effect was simply astonishing. Mental strength was different from normal inner force. It had always been extremely difficult to improve. If Chuxio had to rely on hard work to improve this 1/10, he might not be able to achieve it even if he went into seclusion for several years. Looking up at the sky, he saw that the central continent was shrouded in a formation, making it impossible to see the sun, moon, and stars. The sky was obscured by layers of misty radiance. Xianjialua was going to look for the other Sanskrit disciples, and Chuxio was also looking for an opportunity to find Lu Fengxian and the others. After witnessing the strength of the monster ghosts, he was indeed a little worried about them. Moreover, with so many cultivators in the central continent, no matter how amazing Chuxio's strength was, he would still need the help of a large number of people to collect enough tokens. This was something Autumn Water had told him about. Throughout history, the final victors of the exalted Divine Palace had basically always come from a large sect, and they had a group of people behind them to help them collect tokens. After all, your opponents weren't pigs. Even if you could defeat all of them, you still had to capture them one by one and collect tokens. Just tracking them would take up 90% of your time. But what Chu Xiu didn't know was that Lu Fengxian and the others were all luckier than him. In the middle of a withered desert, just like the scene in the Green Capital, countless starving ghosts crawled toward Shang Tianliang with their huge bellies and tiny limbs. Shang Tianliang sneered. "You're about to starve to death. Yet you're crawling so slowly. You were useless when you were alive, but now that you're dead, you can't even eat shit when it's hot." Withering power erupted from his body, and the starving ghosts around him exploded one by one. He reached into the stomach of the weakest ghost, and fished out a crystal the size of a thumb. Shang Tianliang smiled in satisfaction. TSK 3 tails, not a small one. In the pitch-black devil cave, endless darkness engulfed Wei Shuya. A series of low murmurs rang out in his ears, telling him to sleep, telling him to rest. Wei Shuya sighed softly and said, "How can I rest before my great cause is accomplished? If I let go when I'm tired, how many people can reach the end of the dangerous path in this world?" Just as Wei Shuya's voice faded, a speck of light blossomed in his palm. It was like the rootless sacred fire burning on the summit of Kunlun, tearing apart the eternal night. In the ghost town, countless rotting corpses and even skeletons rushed toward Qinqing Di. But what welcomed them was a huge fist. One punch, and the ghost town was destroyed. Just like the ghost town that Chu Xiu encountered, the ghost town shattered, but it began to reconstruct itself. Qinqing Di still punched again and again. It was as if he didn't know exhaustion. Again and again, even the ghost town had gone through countless reincarnations, but Qinqing Di's state of mind didn't change at all. He also didn't want to find the ghost town's true body. In the end, the ghost town even suspected that the guy in front of it was also a fake. The ghost town finally couldn't hold on any longer. A small skeleton escaped underground. However, just as it peeked its head out, a foot suddenly descended and crushed it into pieces. "Finally found you." In the dilapidated temple, countless monks were holding alms bowls with scriptures in their hands, chanting Buddhist scriptures in Lu Jianghe's ears unceasingly. Lu Jianghe sneered. Countless blood threads burst out from his body and entered the bodies of those monks, extracting their blood, but those monks didn't have the slightest change. Lu Jianghe closed his eyes and said with a sneer, "That brat Chu Xiu said that we can't trust our eyes, we can't trust our spiritual sense, but this deity only believes in the feeling of blood and qi. Each and every one of them is very real. The power of their blood and qi are no different from ordinary people. Since that's the case, the one who doesn't look like a human the most is the ghost." Lu Jianghe suddenly turned his hand toward the Buddha statue behind him, and fished out a soul crystal. Regardless of the temple or the monks, all of them dissipated. In the brightly lit restaurant, countless handsome and masculine young men were flirting with Mei Qinglian. That's right, in Mei Qinglian's eyes, their actions were flirting with her. Mei Qinglian looked displeased. "Do I look like I'm in need of men? Is this how this thing sees through people's hearts?" She waved her hand lightly, and the karmic fire of the red lotus bloomed in front of her, burning everything. A fat and ugly ghost wanted to escape, but it was shocked to find that the karmic fire of the red lotus had actually ignited in its body, and when it reacted, it had already been burned into a soul crystal. In the mountains of Zhongzhou, Lu Fengxian didn't encounter any ghost. He just stood there and watched the two true fire spirit refinement realm martial artists fight below. In the end, before he could figure out what was going on, the two of them used their killer moves at the same time and killed each other directly. This made Lu Fengxian, who was ready to experience the martial arts of the other big sects, stunned. However, after a moment of shock, he immediately walked over and searched the two martial artists' corpses for 2 tokens. "My luck's not bad." A bright smile appeared on Lu Fengxian's face. He didn't like to fight, so the 2 tokens he'd picked up just happened to be of some help to Brother Chu. On the first day of entering Zhongzhou, apart from Lu Fengxian, Everyone around Chu Xiu encountered a ghost at about the same time, but it didn't take much effort for them to deal with it. None of them were as troublesome as Chu Xiu's. Although Chu Xiu was ready to search for Lu Fengxian and the others, he didn't wander around aimlessly. Instead, he made a beeline for the exalted divine palace in the center of the city. The exalted divine palace had been open for so many years, so it naturally had some experience and tricks left behind by its predecessors. Everyone had to fight in Zhongzhou for a month before the exalted divine palace truly opened. Thus, almost no one ventured into the center of Zhongzhou in the beginning. Instead, they circled around the periphery to fight or kill ghost monsters with their fellow cultivators. As a result, the entire region of Zhongzhou was divided into 3 stages. The first was to search for fellow cultivators and kill ghost monsters in the periphery. They would stay there for about 10 days, during which time nearly half of the people would be eliminated. The next 10 days would be when they entered the center of Zhongzhou and began fighting and fighting. At this time, those who remained were existences above the heaven and earth insight realm. Most of them were qualified to travel alone in the center of Zhongzhou and could fend off high-grade ghost monsters. It was also during this stage that the distance between the various sects would shrink and the cultivators of the various sects would converge. The final 10 days would be when the final battle would begin in front of the exalted divine palace to determine the true victor. It could be said to be an extremely bitter fight. But now, Chu Xiu had given up on the first step, and was ready to head straight for the passage between the periphery and the center of Zhongzhou. This way, there was a high chance that he would run into Lu Fengxian and the others, and it would also save him some time. After all, stealing the tokens and soul crystals from others was much faster than spending the effort to search for them himself. In front of the entrance to a canyon in the center of Zhongzhou, an old man with disheveled hair and a dirty face stared ahead in a daze. He held a bloody head in his hand and swung it back and forth. A strange smile appeared on the old man's face when he saw Chu Xiu's figure. He offered up the head in his hand. "Guest, would you like to have a melon? It's freshly plucked, so its skin is thin and juicy." Chu Xiu raised an eyebrow and a strange smile appeared on his face. "A ghost monster?" The old man acted as if he didn't notice and offered up the head in his hand. However, the head suddenly exploded in the next moment, and an extremely sharp sword light appeared in front of Chu Xiu. The cold sword light froze space and time, and the power of laws was compressed to a radius of 10 meters around the old man, just enough to envelop Chu Xiu's figure. When the sword light appeared between Chu Xiu's brows, he couldn't even move half a step. Chapter 1247. The central province was filled with murderous intents. Not only were there demonic ghosts, but there were also humans. A cold smile appeared on the old man's face. He had killed more than one person with this move. However, in the next moment, the cold smile on his face froze. The cold blade of the sword pierced through Chu Xiu's body, but it dissipated like a bubble. Illusion. Impossible. The old man's eyes widened in disbelief. Illusions might be able to deceive his eyes, but his sword gleam had already sealed the laws of time and space within a radius of 30 feet around him. Although it was only 30 feet, no one would be able to escape using illusions at this distance. Therefore, the only answer was that from the very beginning, from the moment Chu Xiu saw him, he had never treated him as a demonic ghost. What he had seen had always been an illusion. TSK, I've only seen people pretending to be humans, but this is the first time I've seen a human pretending to be a ghost. How creative. A mocking voice came from behind the old man. In the next moment, the cold blade radiance had already enveloped his entire body. It was ethereal and traceless, and its form could not be seen. The old man could only feel the cold blade intent all over his body, but he could not find the source of it. The cold sword chi twisted the power of the rules, and instantly exploded from 30 feet around him. Even the ground under his feet was twisted, forming a huge pit with a diameter of 100 feet. However, in the next moment, he saw the cold blade radiance smashing down as if it was tearing the sky and the earth apart. Chu Xiu held the breaking formation in his hand. It looked like a simple slash, but the momentum of the blade was extremely fierce. A loud sound of metal colliding was heard. The long sword in the old man's hand immediately shattered, and his entire body was sent flying by the huge force. Originally, Chu Xiu's physical cultivation was not weak. At this time, with the blessing of the demon god's power, his physical strength was shockingly strong. Among those at the same level, except for Chen Qingdi, Chu Xiu was not afraid of anyone in terms of physical strength. The god territory spread out, and the old man's body that had been sent flying was forcibly pulled back by Chu Xiu's realm. In shock, the old man's blood qi was burning, but before it could erupt, the old man was shocked to find that the blood qi around his body suddenly stagnated and flowed back into his body. In an instant, it backfired, causing him to suddenly spit out a mouthful of blood. You still dare to play with the power of qi and blood at such an old age? As Chu Xiu spoke lightly, the god territories yin and yang reversed, and the 5 elements were in disorder, forcibly tearing the old man apart. I will fight you to the death. The old man was also a ruthless character. He directly gritted his teeth, inserted his hand into his heart, and suddenly crushed his own heart. As the blood spilled, it turned pitch black, and a terrifying demon shadow bloomed from the blood. However, at this moment, Chu Xiu formed a seal with his hand. Under the old man's dying gaze, the demonic shadow he had created with a secret technique began to distort and was no longer under his control. Instead, it wrapped around his entire body, twisting and twisting as it tried to strangle him to death. In an instant, blood spilled, and the old man died without a complete corpse. Only 4 tokens and a walnut-sized soul crystal fell to the ground. Chu Xiu nodded his head in satisfaction. He was very satisfied with the creation heavenly demon power. The heavenly demon had no form, and the creation demon force was invisible. Many things could be transformed into the impossible. As long as it was an extreme in demon qi, Chu Xiu could forcibly control it with the creation demon force. Even other forces, such as the creation demon force, could be twisted into demon qi. That old man was not of the demon path. Looking at his martial arts path, his explosive power was extremely strong, and his methods were decisive and cruel. He should be an itinerant martial artist who had fought his way up from the bottom. In just over a day, he had already killed 3 people and a demonic ghost. This efficiency could be said to be very high. Moreover, this move of his was indeed very creative. There had always been ghosts pretending to be humans, but there had never been a human pretending to be a ghost. In a special place like the Central State, coupled with the fact that he had used a secret technique to forcibly suppress his aura and make such a ghostly appearance, anyone would think that he was a demonic ghost. Moreover, when facing a demonic ghost, most people would carefully test the weakness of its true body. Almost no one would attack immediately, so it was very easy for the old man to get close and succeed in a sneak attack. Picking up the soul crystal and weighing it, Chu Xiu curled his lips in slight disdain. It was less than half a kilogram. It was too little, and he did not even have the interest to refine it. He looked at the surrounding terrain and estimated the path he had taken. After crossing this canyon and walking for a while, he would be in the hinterland of the Central State. Therefore, this old man actually had the same idea as Chu Xiu. The place he had chosen was not bad, but his strength was a little weak. In other words, he was unlucky to have encountered Chu Xiu. Therefore, Chu Xiu simply did not continue forward. Instead, he replaced the old man at the entrance of the canyon. He stabbed his saber in front of him and closed his eyes to wait. However, Chu Xiu's luck in receiving guests was not as good as that old man's. He waited for a whole day, but no one came. It was not until the second day that a burly warrior from the war-battling immortal sect arrived. He was dressed in battle armor. The moment he saw Chu Xiu, the warrior from the war-battling sect was also stunned. The war-battling sect's war god temple's war god temple master, Sikong Jialua, knew Chu Xiu, but that was only limited to the war god temple's warriors who had participated in the fight for the Blessed Enclave. This warrior was not from the war god temple, so he did not know Chu Xiu. However, anyone who saw this scene would find it strange. In a place like the Central State, everyone was either fighting with others or looking for someone to fight with, but this person was actually resting here with his eyes closed. What was the meaning of this? Seeing this person, Chu Xiu stretched his neck and let out a long sigh. Someone finally came. I didn't open this road, this tree. Oh, there is no tree here. In short, just hand over your token and soul crystal. The warrior from the war-battling sect was stunned, as if he could not keep up with Chu Xiu's pace. He never expected that Chu Xiu would say such a thing. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. What, you don't understand? In layman's terms, it's a robbery. The warrior from the war-battling sect smiled coldly. You dare to stand here and block the way. You have guts, but I don't know how strong you are, and if you deserve your guts. As the warrior from the war-battling sect finished speaking, his figure moved, and the power of blood and qi around him boiled violently, affecting the power of heaven and earth around him, involuntarily forming a huge storm around him. As the punch landed, a sonic boom instantly resounded between heaven and earth. With every step he took, the ground under his feet exploded into a huge crack, looking extremely horrifying. The warrior from the war-battling sect specialized in physical strength, and there were few who could rival him in the same level. Unfortunately, his opponent was Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu did not use his saber, but also threw a punch. The seemingly unchanged punch made the world stagnate in an instant, and the power of heaven and earth involuntarily poured into Chu Xiu's body. At this time, although he did not use the law embodiment of heaven and earth, and his body did not transform into a demon, his punch contained 70% of the law embodiment of heaven and earth. With a loud bang, the two fists collided, and the ground under their feet directly exploded into a huge pit of hundreds of feet. The warrior from the war-battling sect's eyes instantly changed from contempt to fear, fear of great power. On his right arm, the muscles were smashed, and blood splashed. He quickly retreated, trying to remove this force. But the next moment, Chu Xiu still threw a punch. This time, he could no longer resist the punch, and was immediately blasted away, a large amount of blood spurting from his mouth. Chu Xiu walked slowly to the warrior from the war-battling sect, and said lightly, "Take it out." The warrior from the war-battling sect was aggrieved and horrified, but he was not as skilled as Chu Xiu, so what could he do? He could feel that there was no killing intent coming from Chu Xiu. It would not be worth it if he forced Chu Xiu to kill him. After all, in the central province, killing was a very common thing. The warrior from the war-battling sect only took out 2 tokens, but there were 4 soul crystals, which surprised Chu Xiu. The other party looked like a burly man, but he was actually planning to slay demonic ghosts? Alright, go. Remember, the person who robbed you is Chu Xiu of the eastern region. The warrior from the war-battling sect looked at Chu Xiu in shock. Only at this moment did he realize who the person in front of him was who had seriously injured him with only 2 punches. It was Chu Xiu, the one who joined forces with the Sky Devil Palace to destroy the Bliss Demon Palace of the southern region. He was Gu Zun's successor, a half-step martial immortal, and could even fight against a martial immortal if he went all out. Chu Xiu didn't know that he was quite famous in the southern region. Many people even considered Chu Xiu to be one of the most dangerous people in the competition for the Daluo Divine Palace. Although Chu Xiu wasn't a martial immortal, he was definitely in existence on the same level. The warrior from the war-battling sect was still a little indignant, but when he heard Chu Xiu's name, he immediately got up and looked for a place to heal his injuries. He was lucky to have survived Chu Xiu's attack, because Chu Xiu didn't want to kill people. Chu Xiu was here to rob people, not to be a psychopathic murderer. It would be best if he robbed these people once, killed a wave of monster ghosts, and then robbed them again. Only then would he make the best use of them. Chu Xiu didn't announce his name because he was arrogant and wanted to show off, but because he wanted his name to spread among the cultivators of the central province. When Lu Fengxian and the others heard the news, they would naturally rush over. In the days that followed, Chu Xiu continued to wait for people to come to him. If he was lucky, he would get 7 or 8 people every day, and if he was unlucky, he would get 2 or 3. Basically, there were only a handful of people who could exchange a few blows with him. There was only one person that Chu Xiu failed to rob. At noon on the 6th day, a young-looking Taoist priest who always had a smile on his face came to the front of the canyon. Looking at the messy ground caused by several battles and the faint smell of blood, he raised his eyebrows and asked, "Ghost? People? Waiting for someone? Robbery?" The young Taoist priest nodded. "Oh, I see. As soon as he said this, Taoist light swirled around him, and the four poles of earth, wind, water, and fire changed, distorting the laws around him like a huge black hole. Half-step martial immortal. Chapter 1248. Sowing Autumn Water had told Chu Xiu before that it was normal to run into a first heaven martial immortal in the central province. Thus, it was normal to run into a half-step martial immortal. Chu Xiu had never thought he would be able to move unhindered in the central province. However, the Taoist priest before him was indeed very young. So young that even Chu Xiu was shocked. He had not trained in some secret technique. Rather, he had reached the half-step martial immortal realm at such a young age. The young Taoist priest flung the horsetail whisk in his hand casually. However, the black hole-like power distorted everything in its path. Everywhere it passed, even the natural energy began to distort, and the rules began to change. Tao techniques were natural. However, if one's cultivation in Tao techniques reached a certain level, they would be able to make it unnatural. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. The celestial domain around him suddenly burst forth. Yin and Yang were inverted as they contended against that power. Like a cannonball, Chu Xiu arrived before the young Taoist priest in an instant. His fist smashed down with the might of a landslide. The young Taoist priest smiled. "You specialize in close combat? That's perfect. I've only just mastered my mysterious technique. I'm also looking for an opponent." As soon as the young Taoist priest's voice fell, he also threw a punch. His seemingly fair and tender fist was covered in a layer of golden light at this moment. With a loud explosion, the two fists collided and both of them retreated several hundred feet at the same time. A gentle breeze blew past. As the breeze blew past, even the sand and stones on the ground were reduced to dust that drifted in the air. A strange expression appeared in the eyes of the two people. The next moment, Chu Xiu attacked with his blade. His blade intent exploded, seemingly splitting the earth. The power of his blade was ethereal and formless. A silver Taoist sword appeared in the young Taoist priest's hand. He pointed the sword forward, and the power of the Tao swirled around it. The sword qi stirred the world. The blade ray collided with the sword qi. Powerful sharpness scattered in all directions once again. The blade ray and the sword qi even formed a tornado that continued to engulf everything. However, when the tornado dissipated, Chu Xiu was no longer in front of the young Taoist priest. Illusion? Very interesting. The young Taoist priest kept muttering something. At the same time, he quickly formed hand seals. The four extreme powers of earth, wind, water, and fire circulated around him crazily. Finally, they transformed into an energy storm that soared into the sky and scattered in all directions. The Yuan Qi storm had already engulfed everything within a radius of 1,000 feet. Although it was not strong, the area it covered was extremely wide. The young Taoist priest narrowed his eyes as he sensed everything. An illusion was just an illusion. A smokescreen could deceive the eyes and even the senses, but it still existed. He couldn't see through Chu Xiu's illusions, but the power of heaven and earth, the vital energy of heaven and earth, and the Tao of heaven and earth, could tell him where Chu Xiu was. Found it. In the next moment, the young Taoist priest made a seal with his hand. The golden light connected with his Taoist connotation, and condensed into a strange rune in front of him. It even caused the void to tremble and become unstable. The celestial sealing talisman could seal immortals and suppress demons, and the Tao was supreme. In the next moment, Chu Xiu also made a seal with his hand. The sky-weeping blood rain suddenly descended around him. A huge shadow of the devil tore through the void and crushed the celestial sealing talisman. However, at the same time, the power of the celestial sealing talisman directly sealed the remaining power of the Great Compassion mantra. The sky-weeping blood rain stopped abruptly. Chu Xiu suddenly narrowed his eyes. The violent devil qi swept around him. All the power was absorbed into his body, and his body began to expand in an instant. The young Taoist priest had been extremely calm since he appeared. It was only at this moment that he revealed a look of surprise. Magic power. After the surprise, the young Taoist priest's eyes revealed a trace of seriousness. He put away the long sword and horsetail whisk in his hand, and formed an extremely complicated seal with his hands. The fluctuation of Taoist connotation spread out. In the midst of the lingering clouds and mist, a vague shadow stood between heaven and earth, overlooking all living beings in the world. Magic power, immortal tracker. As the law embodiment of heaven and earth's fist smashed down, the vague shadow in the air seemed to reach out and grab lightly. The laws of heaven and earth instantly changed, turning into countless chains that wrapped around the law embodiment of heaven and earth, preventing Chu Xiu's fist from landing. 3 breaths of time. Both sides lasted for 3 breaths of time. Although it was only 3 breaths of time, the fluctuations of power soared into the sky, looking extremely terrifying. Chu Xiu moved, withdrawing the power of the law embodiment of heaven and earth. At the same time, the young Taoist priest also dispersed the powerful shadow. The robbery failed. I can't rob you, Chu Xiu said lightly. Chu Xiu was here to rob, not to fight to the death. Although he still had many trump cards that he hadn't used, he believed that the other party was the same. The young Taoist priest shook his head and said, Actually, I also wanted to rob you, but now it seems that I can't do it either. Forget it. Let's not waste any more time. Brother, I wish you a smooth robbery. We'll meet again in front of the exalted divine palace. Before leaving, the young Taoist priest cupped his fists at Chu Xiu and said, Northern region, 3 pristine palace, Fangyijian. Chu Xiu also cupped his fists and said, Eastern region, Chu Xiu. After the greeting, they reported their names, and a look of understanding appeared in their eyes. Chu Xiu had previously only been famous in the Eastern region, but after he joined forces with the Sky Demon Palace to destroy the Bliss Demon Palace, his reputation in the Daluotian world was definitely higher than he had imagined. Although Chu Xiu had never heard of Fangyijian's name, the moment he heard the name 3 Pristine Palace, Chu Xiu knew that it was normal for the other party to have such strength. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the 3 Pristine Palace was the #1 sect in the Daluotian world. Therefore, it wasn't strange for a young disciple from the 3 Pristine Palace to display a cultivation of half-step martial immortal. Even if a martial immortal were to jump out now, Chu Xiu wouldn't be surprised. Fangyijian leisurely left, while Chu Xiu continued to wait for others. Chu Xiu's harvest in the past few days was decent, and he had accumulated over 100 tokens. However, if he wanted to enter the exalted divine palace to cultivate, he would have to increase this number by several times. At this time, in another part of the Central Plains, in a ghostly temple, Sword Aura rampaged, indiscriminately killing everything within sight. Even the demonic ghosts hiding in the depths were reduced to soul crystals. When the illusion dissipated, a cultivator in a green robe holding a green long sword was revealed. It was Yuan Fu, the successor of Sword Venerable Ling Tian, who had been defeated by Chu Xiu in the past. Yuan Fu was a person who knew shame and bravery. Since his defeat at the hands of Chu Xiu in High Heaven sect last time, he did not have the face to return to his master's side, and immediately entered retreat to cultivate. It was not until the news that the exalted divine palace was about to open ahead of schedule came that he came out. Brother Yuan's strength has improved again. It seems that the demons and ghosts in the Central Plains won't be able to stop you. A slightly chubby middle-aged cultivator in a brocade robe with a warm smile on his face complimented Yuan Fu. This person was the sect master of the Southern region's divine machine sect, Sikong Tan. It was not considered a large sect, only a mid-tier sect. Cultivators with families and businesses like Sikong Tan rarely came to the Central Plains to try their luck, but he was in the prime of his life and was unwilling to give up, so he came here to gamble. Yuan Fu quickly said, "It's nothing, these are just the weakest demonic ghosts. As long as you don't get blinded by the illusions in front of you, you can kill them with your eyes closed. My master said that if you can't find the true body of a truly terrifying demonic ghost, even if you are a martial immortal, you won't be able to kill it. What a demonic ghost of that level affects is your state of mind, not a simple illusion like this." Sikong Tan shook his head and said, "If we encounter a demonic ghost of this level, we can only escape. Only an existence like Brother Yuan can fight it. By the way, Brother Yuan, before coming in, you told me to pay attention to Chu Xiu's movements, and now I've found him." Yuan Fu immediately asked, "Where is Chu Xiu?" Si Kongtan's expression was a bit strange as he said, Chu Xiu is currently guarding a canyon between the Central Plains outskirts and the Central Plains. He hasn't moved from that place for a long time. What is he doing there? Robbing. Robbing? Si Kongtan nodded his head and said, Yes, he is. That gorge is one of the only ways to reach the central region of the central state. He has already robbed quite a few martial practitioners of their tokens and soul crystals by blocking the way there. Yuan Fu's expression darkened. Chu Xiu is a good schemer, which is in line with his personality. However, those who are unjust are doomed to destruction. This Chu Xiu is so arrogant and overbearing. Does he really think that the Central Plains belongs to his family? Si Kongtan carefully said, Brother Yuan, do you really want to make a move against Chu Xiu? It's not that I'm trying to boost your morale, but Chu Xiu isn't someone easy to deal with. Not long ago, he joined hands with the Heavenly Demon Palace and destroyed the Blissful Demon Palace. He's a ruthless person who dared to raise his blade against a martial immortal. The fight for the Exalted Divine Palace is extremely dangerous. Who knows, in the end, Chu Xiu might be killed by someone or a demonic ghost before we even get to do anything. Yuan Fu snorted coldly and said, I've also heard about this matter. You've all raised Chu Xiu too high. The one who acted at that time was the Heavenly Demon Palace's heaven-shrouding demon hand, Yuan Kongcheng. What does that martial immortal expert have to do with Chu Xiu? He's just secretly inciting those weak factions in the Southern Territory to become cannon fodder, and he only knows how to play tricks. My venerable swordsman Ling Tian's lineage isn't righteous, and my master has never taught me what patience is. He only told me that everything that I've lost, everything that I want, I'll have to rely on the sword in my hand to get it back. I'll take revenge myself. What does it have to do with me if others kill or cripple Chu Xiu? Si Kongtan couldn't help but rub his head. Are all swordsmen so stubborn? Are their brains filled with sword qi? The people of the world's sword sect were like that, and Yuan Fu, the successor of venerable swordsman Ling Tian, was also like that. He didn't know how to be flexible. Of course, even though he thought so, he didn't dare to say it out loud. He was the sect leader of a mid-tier sect, and it wasn't easy for him to befriend the successor of a powerful ancient venerable. He didn't dare to offend him. Chapter 1249. In Si Kongtan's opinion, Yuan Fu wanting to make a move against Chu Xiu was a bit overestimating his own capabilities. You're both Gu Zun's successors, but Chu Xiu's reputation is much more resounding than Yuan Fu's. Therefore, Si Kongtan could only cautiously ask, Brother Yuan, you're not planning on relying on just the two of us to cause trouble for Chu Xiu, are you? Yuan Fu indifferently said, Of course not. I'm not that stupid. I've already contacted Chen Jiolong and Su Jiang. When the time comes, we'll act together. Since Chu Xiu plundered so many cultivators there, he must have quite a few tokens and soul crystals on him. Given my friendship with them, they'll definitely act. I only need to promise that I'll give them all the tokens and soul crystals on Chu Xiu. They'll work even harder. Hearing Yuan Fu say this, Si Kongtan was relieved. It seemed that Yuan Fu still had some idea of what was going on. He didn't just blindly try to kill Chu Xiu. Chen Jiolong and Su Jiang were both Gu Zun's successors. One was from Divine Dragon subduing General's bloodline, while the other was from Venerable Gu Yue's bloodline. It wasn't that Gu Zun's successors didn't interact with each other. They all had their own connections. Only Chu Xiu was a bit special. He'd only heard that he'd offended Gu Zun's successors, but he'd never heard of him befriending any of them. Yuan Fu said coldly, Besides us, I've also prepared a big gift for Chu Xiu. The strongest in the Central Plains aren't humans, but ghosts. Do you still remember the ghost general we encountered? Si Kongtan shuddered. Of course I do. But you're not thinking of provoking that terrifying existence, are you? That's one of the few powerful ghosts in the Central Plains that can move at will. Furthermore, it's completely materialized and can smash people to death without relying on those strange illusions. Even martial immortals don't dare to provoke such a terrifying existence. If we want to lead it to Chu Xiu, I'm afraid we'll be playing with fire and burning ourselves. Yuan Fu said solemnly, The moon-pulling spirit attraction art of Venerable Guyu's lineage is extremely miraculous. As long as you leave a mark on it, the demonic ghost will naturally be attracted. At the same time, you can find a chance to leave another mark on Chushio's body. The demonic ghost will definitely target Chushio and will not rest until he is dead. As for attracting the demonic ghosts, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to do anything. Chen Jiolong and Su Jiang will do it. After Chen Jiolong cast the dragon transformation secret technique, the dragon leaped into the sky, which was enough to burst his physical body's speed to the extreme, even exceeding the level of laws. When the time comes, we won't have to worry about him being injured by the ghost general. Si Kongtan looked at Yu Wenfu in astonishment. He seemed to have underestimated this successor of Sword Venerable Ling Tian. In the past, Yu Wenfu was indeed incomparably arrogant. Apart from some of the ancient Venerable's successors and the heirs of the large sects, he didn't care about anyone else. But after being defeated by Chushio in public, he seemed to have been enlightened. He did things with a bit more calculation and calmed down a lot. Entering the canyon in the heart of the central continent, Chushio was still standing guard. It was already the 9th day, and there should be more people coming here. At that time, Lu Fengxian and the others should also come looking for him. At this time, 2 figures walked over from the distance. They were Yu Wenfu and Si Kongtan. Yu Wenfu stared at Chushio, a cold glint flashing in his eyes. Chushio, you've been living a carefree life these days. During this time, you've snatched tokens and soul crystals from many cultivators. You've been very high profile, but have you ever thought that what you've done might end up benefiting others in the end? Chushio looked at Yu Wenfu in front of him, and it took him a long time to remember who this green-clad guy was. Your Sword Venerable Heaven Sealing's successor, Yu Wenfu? Countless Daoyuotian cultivators had been defeated by his hands, and this Yu Wenfu was indeed not a difficult opponent for Chushio. Back in the arena, Chushio had easily crushed him. If it weren't for this Yu Wenfu's unique appearance, Chushio really wouldn't have remembered him. It's Sword Venerable Ling Tian. Chushio, you're courting death. Yu Wenfu's face was filled with rage. Chushio casually waved his hand and said, "It doesn't matter. It's fine for people like you to give titles, but you just have to go against the heavens." What heaven sealing Ling Tian trampling Tian? What did the heavens do to you for you to target it like this? Looking at you like this, you should know I'm here. So you're planning to bring that fatty next to you to get revenge on me? Taking the initiative to deliver a token and soul crystal to my doorstep. That's not bad. As the ancient Venerable's successor, you must have a lot of good things on you, right? Si Kongtan, who was standing to the side, was stunned. Fatty? He was just a little more muscular, yet he was called a fatty? He now understood that there was a reason why Chushio was so hateful. Yu Wenfu coldly said, "Chushio, is there any point in arguing? No one can win forever, and no one can lose forever. Last time in High Heaven Sect's martial ring, I really underestimated you, but this time I won't." Chushio shook his head and said, "Even if you think too highly of me, you can't beat me. I advise you to hand over all the tokens and soul crystals you have on you. It will save you some time, and you can go rob others." This time, Yu Wenfu did not continue to bicker with Chushio. Instead, he responded to Chushio with a bright sword light. As the ancient Venerable's successor, although Yu Wenfu was beaten miserably by Chushio at the beginning, it did not mean that his talent was poor. In the past, Yu Wenfu had been arrogant and extreme, leaving no leeway in his actions. However, after being dealt a blow by Chushio, he could be said to have learned his lesson from shame and become courageous. During these years of seclusion, he had forcibly raised his sword Dao cultivation by a large margin. The dazzling sword light instantly filled the world, illuminating the surrounding area for hundreds of feet. It was as dazzling as daytime. The sword Dao of Sword Venerable Ling Tian's lineage was powerful and pure. It did not contain any different attributes, but rather it was a pure and simple technique that brought out the most fundamental power of the sword Dao to the extreme. Chushio slashed with his sword. With just one slash, he completely shattered the confidence that Yu Wenfu had accumulated during this period of time. As the saber descended, the saber aura was traceless, ethereal, and formless. However, between the heavens and the earth, a boundless and powerful sharpness surged forth. This was the ethereal slash that Chu Xiu had used with all his might. Its power was almost on par with the divine ability. The sword qi that filled the sky was torn apart. The boundless sharpness wrapped around Yu Wenfu, causing all the hair on his body to stand on end. Yu Wenfu withdrew his sword and retreated. His entire body was shrouded in sword qi, making him look like an unsheathed sword. However, he did not slash at Chu Xiu. Instead, he used the speed of the sword qi to quickly retreat. However, the sharpness of Chu Xiu's ethereal slash followed him like a shadow. No matter how he tried to escape, the ethereal slash would always lock onto him. The next moment, the powerful saber light directly tore apart his protective sword qi and sent him flying. Yu Wenfu could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. Yu Wenfu stood up and stared at Chu Xiu, as if he could not believe it. After such a long time, he thought that his strength had greatly increased after coming out of seclusion. In the end, the gap between him and Chu Xiu had only widened. This was something that Yu Wenfu absolutely could not tolerate. Fortunately, he did not completely crumble because of this slash. Yu Wenfu angrily shouted at Sikong Tan. "What are you waiting for? Waiting for me to die?" As Sikong Tan rushed towards Chu Xiu, he constantly complained in his heart. "You were the one who said that you would go up and test Chu Xiu's strength. In the end, you were almost crushed to death by a weight, and you're still blaming me?" Although Sikong Tan was a rogue cultivator and had built the Divine Machine sect from scratch, his strength was not weak. This was because no matter how good a weakling was at flattery, it was impossible for them to become friends with Yu Wenfu. Because Sikong Tan's early cultivation methods were very heterogeneous, he had also researched many martial arts that were suitable for himself. At the very least, when dealing with an expert like Chu Xiu, he would not need to go head-on with him. At the very least, he would not be like Yu Wenfu, who had rushed up and ended up in a miserable state. Sikong Tan's slightly fat, or rather, muscular body danced in the air. However, his body was jumping strangely, hiding between the void and reality. It looked dangerous, but he very cleverly dodged the saber light that Chu Xiu had slashed out. When Sikong Tan arrived in front of Chu Xiu, he directly raised his hand, and 5 array discs suddenly flew out, burrowing into the ground around Chu Xiu. In an instant, the array light had already risen, wrapping around Chu Xiu. In the next moment, Sikong Tan's hands formed a seal. Heaven and earth yuan qi condensed in the air, and the power of the 5 elements were like 5 chains, locking down on Chu Xiu. Interesting. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. It had been a long time since he had encountered such an interesting martial artist. Generally, when encountering this kind of martial artist with fancy martial arts, Chu Xiu's most common method was to slap them to death. His hands formed a seal, and boundless demonic qi bloomed around Chu Xiu's body. Heaven's tears and blood rain suddenly descended. The scarlet blood rain corroded the array, and the array around Chu Xiu's body did not even last for 3 breaths of time before it shattered. The giant demonic phantom tore through the air, slapping the 5 element chains to the ground with a single slap. At this time, Yu Wenfu rushed over again, sword qi soaring through the air. All of his strength was condensed on the long sword in his hand. Wherever it passed, any power was torn apart by the sword qi, splitting it in half. But in the face of absolute power, it was still useless. The demonic phantom's giant palm slapped out, shattering the sword and sending Yu Wenfu flying. Yu Wenfu once again spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, Chu Xiu took a step forward, instantly arriving in front of Sikong Tan. His fist smashed down, as if a demonic god had descended, its strength incomparably terrifying. Sikong Tan let out a strange cry. His hands formed a seal, and his strength actually split the earth beneath his feet, allowing him to directly burrow underground. But the strength of Chu Xiu's fist was just too great. It was so great that the shockwaves directly blasted out a giant pit that was hundreds of feet wide, just like a small lake. It sent Sikong Tan flying out from the ground, and he also spat out a mouthful of blood as he landed beside Yu Wenfu. Chapter 1250. Sikong Tan coughed up blood with a defeated expression. Looking at Yu Wenfu, who was also coughing up blood, He wanted to spit blood all over his face. Yuan Fu had been acting like he had everything under control, even saying that everything was within his calculations. You're scheming my ass. Now that the two of us are lying side by side coughing up blood, is this also within your calculations? Actually, Yuan Fu's calculations were quite detailed, even down to what they should do at every moment. According to the previous plan, the two of them would delay Chu Xiao and engage in an intense battle, while Chen Jiulong and Su Jiang would lure the powerful demonic ghost over. By the time they had exhausted Chu Xiao and the ghost general had arrived, Su Jiang would use a secret technique to brand Chu Xiao's body and have Chu Xiao fight the ghost general to the death. But now, before Chen Jiulong and Su Jiang had even sent any news, they had made a huge mistake. They had underestimated Chu Xiao and overestimated themselves. Delaying Chu Xiao, with the difference in strength between the two sides, it would be good if they could last a few moves. Chu Xiao walked over slowly and said, "The heavens have the virtue of cherishing life. Actually, I don't really like killing people. Although you've come to find trouble with me, I'll be merciful this time. Hand over the token and soul crystals, and I'll let you live." Xikong Tan whispered to Yuan Fu, "Brother Yuan, let's forget about it for now. This Chu Xiao is too sharp and not to be trifled with. Let's return for now and think of another plan." "Forget about it. Chen Jiulong and Su Jiang have already lured the ghost general over. As long as we delay Chu Xiao, we still have a chance," Xikong Tan said helplessly. "But what do we use to delay him?" "Use your life to delay him." As Yuan Fu's voice fell, a wave of blood rose around his body and fused into his sword. The sword's edge was stained with blood, and sword qi filled the air. In that instant, Yuan Fu's entire body seemed to have fused into the sword. There was no heaven, no earth, no self, but there was the sword. Yuan Fu's figure could no longer be seen in the entire world. The only thing that could be seen was a blood-red sword that seemed to be tearing the heavens and earth apart. Chu Xiao frowned. His intuition told him that something was wrong. It was true that there was hatred between him and Yuan Fu, but did Yuan Fu take the wrong medicine? He clearly didn't want to kill anyone. It was rare for him to be merciful and let him live, but he didn't run. Instead, he insisted on fighting with his life on the line. What kind of trick was this? There was no enmity between him and the man who killed his father or stole his wife. Wasn't he just defeated by me once? Is he so stubborn? Isn't this guy a little too petty? Chu Xiao's eyes flashed with killing intent when he saw the blood sword tearing through the sky and slashing towards him. It was a deep killing intent. This time, he really didn't want to kill them. He only wanted to take their money, not their lives. But since Yuan Fu wanted to court death, then he would fulfill his wish. His god domain spread out, and all the power within a few hundred meters was under his control. Yin and Yang were in chaos, and the 5 elements were inverted. All the power was under Chu Xiao's control. He continuously strangled the blood sword that was slashing towards him, revealing Yuan Fu's appearance within. The ethereal slash fell, and its extreme sharpness collided with the sword. In an instant, the powerful sharpness formed a huge storm that soared into the sky. Yuan Fu had used his blood as a guide to fuse his own power into the longsword, turning himself into a sword. This was already considered a rather extreme method among sword cultivators. Even so, this kind of power was still no threat to Chu Xiao. "Xikong Tan, are you still not going to make a move? Use your divine armament formation." Yuan Fu's voice rang in Xikong Tan's ears. He had a helpless look on his face, but he had no choice but to make a move. It wasn't easy for him to befriend Yuan Fu and sneak into the circle of Prime Sovereign's successors. Today he had to join Yuan Fu in attacking Chu Xiao. The grudge between them was already set in stone. If he didn't make a move now, not only would he offend both sides, he wouldn't benefit at all. As soon as Yuan Fu's voice fell, spots of light lit up around Xikong Tan's body. Upon closer inspection, these spots of light turned out to be small formation plates, as well as some weapon-like items. However, these items were currently being controlled by chains of astral energy, forming a strange formation. The source of these astral energy chains was none other than Xikong Tan himself. Xikong Tan was born from a humble background. In his early years, in order to accumulate financial resources, He also excelled in formations, smithing, and other things besides martial arts. Although he couldn't compare to professional smithing masters or formation masters, those people might not necessarily be stronger than him in terms of martial arts. Normally, knowing so many things would be a mess, but Sikong Tan could be considered a genius. He actually fused all these random things into one, and combined them with his own martial arts to create the divine armament formation as his trump card. Densely packed formation plates, and some weapon-like items appeared one after another. Only the heavens knew just how much Sikong Tan had accumulated over the years. However, these seemingly unrelated items were linked together by a secret technique. Their powers actually began to interconnect, forming a strange formation that shrouded Chu Xiu. At the same time, Yuan Fu's eyes revealed a ruthless glint. The blood and qi around him erupted once again, and the blood sword soared into the sky. In the next instant, that sharp gleam had already arrived before Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes, and the demonic aura around him erupted violently. Like a black hole, it madly absorbed all the power around it. His figure began to expand as he used the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. In that instant, Chu Xiu was like a devil incarnate, incomparably terrifying. With a slap from his left hand, a powerful force directly shattered the crimson sword. A crack appeared on the long sword in Yuan Fu's hand, which expanded and finally shattered. Yuan Fu's entire person was flung through the air by the force of the palm strike. His body seemed to be on the verge of shattering, and he was completely covered in blood. At the same time, Chu Xiu's right fist smashed down, and a series of crackling sounds rang out. All the formation plates and weapons shattered under this one punch from Chu Xiu. Although Sikong Tan withdrew his hand in time and cut off the connection with those things, he was still sent flying by the wind from the punch. Like a gourd rolling on the ground, he flew backward and suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. He was not hurt, but rather, his heart ached. These formation plates and weapons were not gang qi, which could be recovered after being used up. They were all the treasures he had accumulated over the years. But now, all of them had been destroyed by Chu Xiu. He had worked hard for over 100 years, and now he was back to where he was before. Sikong Tan wanted to cry, but no tears came out. He even felt like strangling Yuan Fu to death. Mystique. That was a mystique. It was a mystique that not even martial immortals could fully grasp. Yet Chu Xiu, a Tongxian realm cultivator, was able to use it so skillfully. That was simply bullying. The two of them were simply not on the same level. How were they supposed to fight? Chu Xiu walked over with the formation plates in his hand, killing intent in his eyes. He did not ask why Yuan Fu wanted to fight him with his life on the line. To Chu Xiu, that was no longer important. He had already given them a chance to live. Yet Yuan Fu was still serious and wanted to fight him to the death. Since that was the case, Chu Xiu would grant him his wish. In a fight to the death, one must have the resolve to fight to the death. No one could escape from that. Anyone who wanted to kill Chu Xiu would not be spared by Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu was unable to repay enmity with kindness, but he was still able to stop killing by killing. Seeing Chu Xiu walk over with his blade in hand, brimming with killing intent, Sikong Tan was completely terrified. In the end, he used the last of his power to escape. He could not care less about Yuan Fu. That idiot was seeking death, but he did not want to stay behind and seek death with Yuan Fu. It was already a moment of life and death, so he could not care so much anymore. But just at that moment, a horrifying aura suddenly attacked. Chilling winds blew, and mournful howls could be heard. The entire sky instantly became incomparably gloomy, and the cries of gods and ghosts resounded throughout the world. Sikong Tan's eyes immediately lit up. We're saved. At that moment, Yuan Fu, who was heavily injured by Chu Xiu, was also laughing loudly as he vomited blood. Chen Jiolong and Su Jiang had arrived earlier than he expected. Actually, it was not that Chen Jiolong and Su Jiang were fast, but that the person behind them was too fierce, so they had no choice but to increase their speed. A golden figure in the shape of a dragon was flying in the air, and it was carrying a person. Its speed was so fast that it was like a bolt of lightning. Even with Chu Xiu's eyesight, he could only vaguely see that the other party should be a tall and sturdy man. As for the person he was carrying, It was a young man wearing a white Confucian robe. Of course, none of this attracted Chu Xiu's attention. At that moment, all his attention was focused on the thing behind them. It was an extremely horrifying existence. It was close to 10 feet tall, and it was wearing black battle armor. It held a huge crescent moon blade in its hand, which emitted a blood-red glow. There was no flesh or blood on its body, and what was exposed was layers of seemingly solid black mist. Even its face was the same, with only 2 scarlet eyes that emitted a horrifying red glow. That thing was not human, but it also did not seem like a demon ghost, because its aura was too strong, and it had already condensed into a solid form. This was completely different from the demon ghosts that Chu Xiu remembered. But in the central province, if this thing was not a demon ghost, then what was it? Wherever that thing passed, all power would be assimilated into an extremely evil power. It was not demonic qi, but more accurately, it should be ghost qi of the netherworld. Along the way, it directly left behind a long ghost domain, and even the essence of the world was repelled outside. Chen Jiulong unleashed all of his power and began to fly. It wasn't because of Yuan Fu, but because that thing was too terrifying. If he was even a bit slower and got caught by Yuan Fu, his bloodline would basically be cut off. However, when he arrived at the agreed place, he didn't see the exhausted Chu Xiu. He only saw Yuan Fu and Xikong Tan lying there miserably, which made him jump in fright. This didn't seem to be the same as what they had agreed on. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.